My bad. Oh, excuse me. Like, share, subscribe, leave a comment. We back in our book about the New World Order, the Trilateral Commission, which is a subset of the Illuminati. I know I got to get my what you call that there smoke detector battery. I'm gonna do it tomorrow. I'm tired. I work two jobs and I do YouTube shit. I'm tired. But let's get off into our book. I love this book. The same thing, this book written in 1980, same thing applies to 2025. Mm. So, the Grand Area. The Grand Area, as the United States led non German bloc was called during 1941, was only an interim measure to deal with the emergency situation of 1940 and early 1941. The preferred idea was even more grandiose. One world economy. Look, they've been planning this shit for 200 years. One world economy dominated by the United States. A 20 a July 24th, 1941 memorandum to the President and Department of State outlined the Council's view of the national interest, describing the role of the Grand Area in U.S. economic, political, and military policy. The memorandum number EB34 summarized the Grand Area concept, meaning for American policy, its function in the present war, and its possible role in the post war period. The Economic and Financial Group had found a self contained United States Western Hemisphere economy impossible without great changes in the U.S. economic system. To prevent altercations in the United States economy, the Council had, in words of group member Winfield Reifler, gone on to discover what elbow room the American economy needed in order to survive without major readjustments. This living space had to have the basic raw materials needed for the nation industry as well as the fewest possible stresses, making for its own disintegration, such as unwieldy export surpluses or severe shortages of consumer goods. The extensive studies and discussions of the council groups determined that, as a minimum, most of the non German world, the Grand Area, was needed for elbow room. In its final form, it consisted of the Western Hemisphere, the United Kingdom, the remainder of the British Commonwealth, and the Empire, the Dutch East Indies, China, and Japan itself. In EB34, the Economic and Financial Group stressed the significance of the economic integration of the Grand Area. All member countries had to be able to prosper within the region, or, or instability would inevitably result. So, this is the memorandum. In the event of American British victory, much would have to be done toward reshaping the world, particularly Europe. In this grand area, organization should prove useful during an interim period of readjustment and reconstruction. The grand area might be an important stabilizing factor in the world's economy. Very likely, the institution developed for integration of the grand area would yield useful experience in meeting European problems, and perhaps it would be possible simply to interweave the economies of the European countries into that of the Grand Area. The Grand Area was thus considered a core region which could always be extended to include more countries. At the end of the memorandum, the Economic and Financial Group outlined the key topics for future study on integrating the Grand Area. Leading the list were financial measures, the creation of the international financial institutions to stabilize currencies and the international banking institutions to aid in investment and development of backward countries, keep them in debt and under control. Africa. Wow. They had thus identified at a very early date the need for international monetary fund. And the World Bank shut the front door. And the World Bank, all controlled by the Rothschilds. This is your Illuminati right here. Wow. Which they were to specifically suggest in February 1942. Evidence for the Council's key role in setting and implementing American war aims from mid 1941 to mid 1944 is even greater than for the earlier period. The international setting. Internationally, the period mid 1941 to 1944 was marked by intensified warfare and stepped up planning for post-war war. Germany attacked the Soviet Union in June 1941. 3 months later, the United States began an undeclared naval war against Germany in the Atlantic. During the second half of 1941, the danger of conflict in the Pacific heightened as Japan prepared to push south and west from its bases in Indochina. In the year following December 7, 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor and U.S. entry into full belligerency, the Allied fortunes was reached. During 1943 and 44, however, the Axis powers suffered sharp and increasingly disastrous reverses as complete defeat and the end of the war approached. After mid 1941, both the Council and the government assumed that the defeat of the ACOs was both necessary and inevitable. A new world order. Look at that. See that shit? A new world order was projected with international political and economic institutions, which would join and integrate all of the Earth's nations under the leadership of the United States. Look at this shit was planned. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. President Roosevelt, who was a 33rd degree Mason, agreed with the State Department of the Council of Foreign Relations view, stressing the dangers to British and U.S. raw material supplies which Japanese expansions pose. The president stated during the second half of 1941 that a Japanese attack on British and Dutch possessions in the Far East would immediately threaten the vital interests of the nation and should result with war with Japan. Prime Minister Churchill also emphasized the need to prevent Japanese movement south, which would cut lifelines between the Dominions and England. Such a blow to the British government, he argued, might be almost decisive. Thus, the top governmental policymakers on both sides of the Atlantic agreed that their joint interests demanded that Japan be prevented from capturing Southeast Asia. Japan also saw its essential natural interests join with fate of Southeast Asia. Japan had its own equivalent of the Grand Area, called Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. Japan's new order involved control over the Dutch East Indies. That was a drug trade. We're going to get off into that. At the first pearl in perspective colonial booty. China, Indochina, Thailand, Burma, Malaya, the Philippines, and certain Pacific islands. The Japanese felt that control of these areas was necessary to attain economic self sufficiency, especially in raw materials. They planned to eventually create a self contained empire from Manchuria on the north to the Dutch East Indies in the south for the same economic reasons the United States and British Britain wanted to dominate the region. The three great European colonial powers, Britain, France, and the Netherlands, controlled Southeast Asia in 1941. Since only Britain, much weakened by a struggle with Germany, was still an independent power, Japan recognized a prime opportunity to secure present and future economic needs. In late July 41, Japanese leaders decided to move into southern Indochina as a first step toward control of all Southeast Asia. The U.S. reaction was forceful. Japanese assets in the United States were frozen, and a total economic embargo, including oil, was imposed. Britain and the Netherlands government exile followed suit. The council had recommended this policy in January 1941. The seriousness of this action was well known at the time. Many people had previously warned that it would provoke Japan into war, since it cut off many of the raw finished materials, including oil, which that country had to have service as a great power. The Japanese were informed that there would be no relaxation of the embargo until Japan gave up the territory it fought for years to gain in China. Wow. The American stand on China weakened the moderates in Tokyo and joined with previous mentioned factors made war inevitable. There were several reasons for the U.S. position. First, U.S. minimum living space, the Grand Area, included China. The Council felt that China's economic development would lay the basis for a peaceful Far East during the post war period, since its industrialization would create a large demand for Japanese and U.S. production, giving great aid to both countries in solving surplus and unemployment problems. This meant that Japan had to restore the territorial integrity of China. Wow, I had no idea Japan was that powerful back in the 40s. In addition, as we shall see in more detail shortly, the long range war aims of the United States, which became fixed during this time, involved a single world economy. There we go with the New World Order again. A single world economy, an open door world, the maximum possible U.S. living space. Final negotiations took place during November, cultivating a 10-point plan. This memorandum took a hard line, visualizing a return to the status quo of 1931 by demanding a Japanese withdrawal from China and Indochina in return for resumption of trade relations. With its oil supplies getting low because of the trade embargo, Japan had no choice between submission and war. Roosevelt and his advisors, expecting Japan to advance south, had concluded that this movement would endanger the U.S. interests and had to be stopped by a United States declaration of war and armed intervention if necessary. Roosevelt told Harry Hopkins that a Japanese attack on the Netherlands East Indies should result in a war between the United States and Japan. On November 28th, the World Council, made up of Hull Secretary of War and longtime council member Henry Stimson and Secretary of Navy Frank Knox, decided that Roosevelt should inform Congress and the American people that if Japan attacks Singapore or the East Indies, the security of the United States would be in danger and war might result. It was agreed that Hull, Stinson, and Knox should draft this projected message to Congress. The idea behind the message was to persuade Congress and the public that Japanese expansion constituted a threat to national interests of the United States, that military confrontation was necessary. Roosevelt faced the difficult task of persuading Congress and the American people that war for the ends was justified. How to convince the American people that an attack on British and Dutch colonies in the South Pacific was an attack upon our own frontiers. was a tremendous difficult task for the president. Nevertheless, during the last week of peace, Roosevelt gave Britain assurances of armed support in case of Japanese aggression. The assault on Pearl Harbor, damn, that did it, which came, the Japanese had correctly calculated that the United States was likely to declare war when they moved further into Southeast Asia, made the whole problem mute. Yep. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. I love history. Ooh, that next one is on the Bilderberg. Oh my God, we dealing with all the secret societies. This is the Council of Foreign Relations. You know what? Let me change this title. Mm. Council. Oh shit. Damn. Oh my God. How am I spelling it? EIGN. Okay, there we go. There we go. Because I need to put that in there because this is a subset of the Illuminati, another subset group, the Council of Foreign Relations. Okay. Now, where was I at? Okay. All right. So I'm not going to keep this too long. Okay. In the late 1941, the Department of State created a special committee to carry out post-war planning. The Advisory Committee on Post-War Foreign Policy was Under Secretary Wells wrote a new approach to a problem that the department had previously handled. The council had a central role in establishing the advisory committee in which its leading planners filled key positions. The, advisor, the advisory committee set the framework for all key decisions of post-war war during 1942, 43, and 44. It dealt with the fundamental issues of national policy, such as the needs of U.S. economy, society, the relationship of these requirements to the rest of the world, and the role of international organizations. The original advisory committee was an aggregation of people with close ties to New York, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Department of State. The East Coast was in control with other sections of the country. White Anglo-Saxon upper-class businessmen, lawyers, and technocrats dominated the committee. So that would be like a Bill Gates and them on the committee, lawyers and businessmen, CEOs. The working class, generally labor, consumer, small business, minorities, and ethnic groups have virtually no representation. You think just like they ain't got none now. Those at the top of the department and those from the council made up the core of the advisory committee, decision makers who decided the fate of the post-war war. The core group consisted of Hull, Wells, Davis, Taylor, Bowman, and Blavatsky. They were people who, beginning in early 1943, became known as informal political agenda group, which President Roosevelt called my post-war advisors. They were senior men who selected, planned, and guided the agenda for the entire advisory committee and also drafted the United Nations Charter. Look at that shit. Now here come the UN. Wow. Like, share, subscribe. I'm going to end that there. And then we're going to finish up chapter